My name is Karen Kawasaki. I've been working as a fortune teller for more than 20 years now, and it's not all bad. Sometimes people call me a fraud, and sometimes people get so used to it that they become my regular customers. When the fortune I tell ends up the same, I get their next visits or praise. But when it doesn't come their way as they thought it would, I become the target of theirs when it was them who chose to trust me in the first place. The fortune I tell is not always based on the assumption of their past experiences. Sometimes, for some particular person, my sight decides to show what will unfold. Whenever that happens, it's either to avoid it at any cost or to face it head on. And my sight takes a toll depending on each fortune that comes true. Well, whatever it is, fortune telling is a risky business because you never know what might come your way when you aren't looking, as I have experienced such a misfortune myself. It was around the time when I had just gained my sight, and my Nana was the one who was trying to teach me everything related to family history and how it came to have such a powerful possession. My sight has passed down from generation to generation, and my Nana was the last one before me to have it. I was given my sight from her, and before that, I did not know anything as it was concealed from me since birth. I know what you guys must be thinking. What a bunch of baloney. People don't possess powers in real life, right? You're right. People don't possess magical powers, and at least not the kind you have seen in fantasy movies or read in books. No, this is not some power I possess. This is a gift, or some might call it a curse, that has been bestowed upon people like priests, shamans, or fortune tellers. It is to differentiate or face the things that aren't supposed to be here, such as wandering spirits, ghosts, or evil humans. Trust me, coming from the person who had lived a normal life up to this point, believing such things are myths and fantasies, I was just as shocked as you guys when I saw my first vision. I didn't believe Nana. Even when she told me about the foresight that was supposed to show me glimpses of people's future was first given to her great-great-great-grandfather, or when she told me that the sight that was passed down to her from her grandfather was now passed down from her to me. I thought the old hag had finally gone senile. Yes, I know a very disrespectful tone toward my elder, and hell yes, I love her to the moon and back, etc. But sometimes that old woman just drove me crazy from all her nagging and stuff. But I never knew if her babbling this time might come out to be true. Anyway, back to what I was telling you guys. Nana was rambling about her story to me, and I was not focused at all when my boyfriend Carlene called me for movies. So in the middle of the story, I stood up saying I had something urgent to do and got out of the house. For some reason, this was the first time she did not nag me for going out at any time I saw fit. When I was watching the movie with him, my eyes suddenly started burning, so I excused myself to the bathroom to wash them. As I was walking to the bathroom, I bumped into someone, and as he was apologizing, I froze, because it was the first time I had glimpses of someone's future. In those visions, the car he was in met with an accident, and then it caught fire. Avoid cars for today. The words came out of my mouth without even realizing it. The man looked at me as if I was rambling nonsense and went his way. The burning sensation that I was having stopped. I rushed back to Carlene and told him that I have something urgent to do, so I would be leaving. He tried asking me what it was, but I did not say another word and just headed out. I was in a hurry to drive back to Nana and ask more questions, but the road was blocked by traffic. There were police cars and an ambulance coming this way, so I rolled down the window mirror and asked what was happening. "Ma'am, there was a car accident. The car had set into fire, so we don't know if the man's still alive or not, but they're trying to rescue him," the boy selling car accessories told me. I was shocked as I heard this, because it couldn't be a coincidence that I saw the same vision. I somehow managed to turn the car around and took a different route, and when I reached home, Nana was already waiting for me. She smiled at my distressed face and took me inside. After I calmed down, she started to tell me everything, from when she got her first vision to now. She told me that such misfortune was rarer than fortune, but when it comes, we ought to avoid it at any cost. After talking with her for hours, I fell asleep around 2 a.m. The next morning when I woke up, I went first into Nana's room, but no matter how hard I tried to wake her up, she did not open her eyes. There was a note beside me, which said after passing down the site to my successor, I would always meet the same fate as her after he or she receives her first vision. After the ceremony, I decided to sell the house and move to a different place. I started avoiding places with crowds and tend to cope in a room, but I couldn't for long since I needed money to survive. That was when I decided to become a fortune teller, so I prepared everything and started to tell the fortune of others. The vision only came once a month, but I often tell my fortune after listening to their past and deduct what might happen next according to their possible action. It's like a math problem. People mostly want to know if they would be wealthy enough in the next 5 years, if they'll find romance in life, if they'll have any enemies, etc. 7 years after Nana's death, I married a man who accepted my weird stuff just the way I was, and I had a beautiful son. And within that time, I had my share of bad visions and good visions. Sometimes people heed my warnings, and sometimes they didn't. But that day, as I was telling a fortune to a man, I had a weird vision that I couldn't understand myself. The vision included the man sitting in front of me, a knife with a moon carving on it, a common kitchen knife, and someone else wearing a red shirt, whose face I couldn't see. The glimpses were so small that I did not know how to warn the person, so I just told him to stay aware of the people you meet today. The night as I reached home, the lights were off, so I thought Ben might be sleeping in his room. As I turned the light on, I saw the entire house was a mess. It looked like someone had broken in, so I called out for Ben, and he didn't respond. A bad feeling started to emerge in my gut, so I rushed inside when I saw bloody trails in the kitchen. Ben was lying on the floor. His white shirt had turned red from the blood, and the knife that had stuck in his heart had a silver carving on it. It was the first time I had 2 visions in a day, and this was not about the future. As Ben was fighting with the guy who had broken in, he grabbed the knife and stabbed it in his shoulder from the back. And then, as Ben stumbled, he again stabbed his heart. But he couldn't take out the knife, as it had stuck there, so he ran away scared. I fell down on the floor crying, because despite seeing others' future, I couldn't see or prevent mine. As I was crying loudly, Samuel walked down the stairs. But before he could see his father in this condition, I rushed to him and took him back upstairs. After tucking him in, I called 911 and reported the incident to him. I added a little something to the report which said I saw the man leaving my house and provided them with a detailed sketch. My son is all grown up now, and even though I can pass my sight to him, I've decided to wait for someone who would be stronger and more careful than I was. Someone who can protect their loved ones. I finally understood why Nana was always so grumpy. She may have lost everything to these misfortunes, but I won't do the same mistake Nana did by not telling me to protect what's closer to mine.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
So, what do you want to do next? I looked at Sarah's face and asked. Look, there's a fortune teller. Why don't we see what the future holds for us? She asked with excitement. My name is Tom Minsk, and the girl I'm with is my girlfriend. It's been a month since we started dating, and this is our second date since then. I know it's not much, but she says she's always busy with her work and stuff, and we hardly have time to go on a date. Today, she was the one who asked me out first and took me here to an amusement park of all places. It doesn't matter if I didn't enjoy it a bit. All that counts is that she was having fun. Sure, why not? I shrugged my shoulders and followed her to where the fortune teller's tent was. We walked into this dark and mysterious environment, which had an entirely different aura of its own. A woman was sitting across a table, who seemed to be in her later 40s. She had long black hair down her waist tied in a high ponytail, her thick lashes highlighting the beauty of her closed eyes, and her figure, which even behind the table looked as defined as a statue. She opened her eyes upon hearing our footsteps and looked straight in my direction with her deep green eyes. I couldn't believe someone of her age could still look this mesmerizing. Her lips curled into a smile, as if she had understood what I was thinking about, which made me look away from the embarrassment of getting caught. I don't believe you people have faith in fortune telling. So what brings you here? Even though I was looking at the ground, I could tell her gaze was on me. Well, we're here to know our fortunes. Tell us about how we will turn out in the next 5 years. Will we still be together? Sarah asked impatiently, which made the woman's gaze shift toward her. That depends on your actions, miss, she said with a calm, smooth voice. What kind of fortune telling is this? Then tell me if I'll be rich in the next 5 years, Sarah asked in an annoyed tone. Sit down here and pick a card, the woman said in the same soothing voice as before. Sarah followed her command and sat in the chair on the opposite side of the woman and picked a card. The woman took her card and smiled while looking at it carefully. You will receive an immense amount of wealth, but it will be taken away from you after a short period, she told her. But by the looks of it, Sarah did not like the fortune she told her and stood up in an instant. Why did I even bother to come to a fraud like you? Let's go, Tom, she annoyingly said and headed out. That will be $50, the woman said, with the same constant smile on her face that had been since we came here. I took out my wallet from my pocket and handed her the money, but as she was grabbing the money, our hands brushed and she froze for a few minutes. Her smile disappeared, and then she looked at me, but with a weird look on her face. Stay away from that girl. She is dangerous to you, she said with a straight face, and then left my hand without taking my money. For some reason, I had a frightening feeling in my chest, so I left her tent immediately. I saw Sarah standing outside. I grabbed her and walked away from the place. There was an anxiousness that wasn't going away as I was looking at Sarah beside me, but I tried to shake it hard and continued to focus on my date. I knew Sarah. She wasn't like that. Even though she knew I was rich, she never tried to take advantage of that. Sarah told me she had a surprise for me and took me to a hotel. As we talked in the hotel room, I saw the bed that was covered with roses. There were wine bottles and glasses prepared for us. I understood what this was about, so the moment we walked in, I started kissing and undressing her. But she stopped me in between and told me we will drink first, because she had some surprise prepared for me. I accepted her command and we started drinking and smooching between the drinks. It was around my 6th glass when I started feeling a little dizzy. My legs and hands started to feel numb, as if something had drained my energy all of a sudden. I looked at her as she looked at me with seducing eyes and said something that I couldn't understand. My hands moved on their own as I started doing what she asked me. It was like I was watching myself doing something against my will. I transferred a huge amount of money into her account, and then she started to leave. That was when I gained control of myself again, so I grabbed her and shouted at her while asking to explain what she was doing. She grabbed the wine bottle and hit me on the head with it. I stumbled while looking at her dumbfounded. I don't know what came over me, that I grabbed the next wine bottle in my hand and crashed it into her head. She started bleeding. As I saw the warm blood flowing and covering my hand, I took the broken shard of the bottle into her chest and stabbed her with it. Her eyes started to become closed, and her body felt lifeless as she fell. I started to realize what I had done and got scared. So I started to clean the proof of our presence from the room, and then somehow managed to take her out in the middle of the night. After that, I took her to the woods in my car, and as we reached, I stepped out of the car and broke the fuel box. While her body was inside the car, I set it on fire. I hid in a safe distance and watched it for about 2 hours, and then left for my home. As I was going back, I thought of that fortune teller who was so right about Sarah. Even though I was going home at the moment, I had decided to go and search for the woman later, because she seemed to know the things that saved my life. her fortune telling was real.
In the early 20th century, Markia Sarenko escaped from her home country of Russia, feeling the bloodthirsty Bolsheviks who were in the process of turning their native land into the political wasteland that was the USSR. She escaped over the border to China, who at the same time had yet to be consumed by communism as a temporary stopover on her way to the United States. However, it was in China that the superstitious Maria consulted a fortune teller, wishing to get a good idea of what her journey had in store for her. The Chinese fortune teller gave Maria some very good news indeed, telling her that not only would she successfully make it to the United States, but that she would give birth to a daughter, whose beauty would become globally renowned. But that under all circumstances, she should avoid so-called dark waters. Then, after making it all the way to San Francisco, Maria gave birth to a daughter on July 20th, 1938, naming her Natalia Nikolaevna Zarenko. Natalia would gain the fame that the fortune teller had predicted, but would be known by another name entirely. That name was Natalie Wood. Natalie's mother essentially groomed her for stardom from the time she learned to walk and talk. She sent her to singing, dancing, and acting lessons, training her to be a complete triple threat, before parading her around movie studios in the hopes that she would be discovered, and thus fulfill her destiny. It was such an intensive experience that it verged on abuse. Natalia's mother was utterly ruthless and unforgiving, separating her from her sister and even denying her medical assistance for injuries in the instance that this would only make her stronger. Maria paid close attention to the prophetic warnings of the fortune teller too, and made an effort to give Natalia a deep ingrained fear of deep water. Yet, despite her efforts, the fortune teller's predictions almost came true on the set of a movie called The Green Promise. During shooting, a young Natalie was set to run across a bridge that was set to collapse during a rainstorm, a bridge that just so happened to run over a pool of rough, dark water. The director insisted that the timing would be just right, and although there would be an element of on-screen peril, she would be entirely safe. But terrifyingly enough, one of the set stuff happened to pull the collapsed mechanism too early, and Natalie broke her wrist as she fell into the water. Her mother was distraught, believing she was about to see the prophecy of drowning come true before her very eyes. But the set staff, acting quickly, helped Natalie pull herself to safety as she struggled to do so with a broken wrist. If she wasn't terrified of water beforehand, she certainly was then. Maria refused to get her daughter any medical assistance for the broken wrist either, believing that an insistence on doing so would deter directors from hiring her in the future. The injury scarred her wrist so heavily that Natalie went on instead on covering the scars with multiple bracelets for the rest of her life. Not only because she believed the wound was ugly, because it reminded her of one of the most traumatic instances of her life, so traumatic that she never, ever learned to swim, and was reported to have panic attacks whenever she tried to wash her hair. Despite her traumas, Natalie had a long and successful film career, and will go on to wed fellow star Robert Wagner. They had a rocky relationship and naturally got divorced and remarried before having their one and only daughter, Natasha. Then, during Thanksgiving weekend of 1981, Natalie Roberts and another movie star, Christopher Walken, were enjoying some rest and relaxation aboard Wagner's yacht, named the Splendor, around the Catalina Island off the coast of California. Only one other person was with them, the boat's captain, a man named Dennis Davern. They spent the weekend shopping, sunning themselves, sailing, dining out, and profusely drinking on the night of November 27, 1981, after yet another evening of heavy drinking. An argument between Natalie and Robert broke out when it grew so intense that Natalie demanded that Captain Davern take her ashore on the small dinghy that was kept on board the Splendor. The pair then spent the night in a hotel before returning to the boat the following morning, when Natalie and Robert apparently talked things out and buried the hatchet. The following night, Robert Natalia, Captain Davern, and Christopher Walken went ashore to dine in a restaurant called Doug's Harbor Reef. Here, they continued their stint of heavy drinking, reportedly ordering 2 bottles of wine, 2 bottles of champagne, and numerous daiquiris, with one of the waiting staff reporting that they barely touched their food. The proper people were so intoxicated that the restaurant manager reportedly called harbor security to ensure that they made it back to the boat safely that night. According to Captain Davern, Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken argued violently over politics, as well as the direction that Natalie's career should take. He has since stated that the argument grew so violent that one of the men threw an empty wine bottle at the other before Natalie had to get involved to separate the pair. The argument then shifts to one between Natalie and Robert, with Natalie apparently telling Robert that she'd had enough before retiring to her room for the night at around 3:30 a.m. The next morning, on November 29th of 1981, a ship-to-shore call was made from the Splendor, one in which Captain Davern reported to the U.S. Coast Guard that Natalie Wood was missing. A search begins, one that ended just a few hours later at around 8 a.m. when Natalie Wood's drowned body is found floating near the ship's inflatable dinghy, the very same one she had used to escape the boat just 2 days prior. She was wearing nothing but a nightgown, a pair of socks, and a jacket. The autopsy showed that she had a blood alcohol content of 0.14%, almost double the legal limit for driving. There was also evidence that she had taken a rather large amount of powerful painkillers, and the time before her death. She was just 43 years old when she passed away. Amazingly, on the day she died, Robert Wagner is not intensively questioned by police. It's only a few days later that the 3 men who were on the boat that night are brought in for questioning, and when they are each tells us suspiciously similar stories that details the evening's events. As a result, Natalie's death was assumed to be nothing more than an accidental drowning. The nation was dumbstruck by such a horrible, unforeseeable tragedy, and mourned in tandem with Robert Wagner, who went on to raise their 2 daughters as a single parent. 2 daughters who are almost inconsolable, distraught at the sudden death of their beloved mother. Natalie's death seemed to remain an open and shut case for an entire 30 years, until a shocking revelation turned public attention back onto the situation. Captain Dennis Davern, the man who had been captaining the Splendor that night, broke his silence on the case and came forward to state that he had in fact lied to the investigating law enforcement. The nation was shocked to hear that the argument that night between Walken and Wagner had not actually been rooted in politics, but the suspicion that Walken had been secretly flirting with Natalie whenever Robert Wagner's back was turned. As was previously mentioned, the argument then shifted to one between Wagner and Natalie after Walken that retired to his room. But then, when Natalie had tried to do the same and retire to bed, Robert Wagner had followed her to continue the argument. Then, sometime later, Wagner stormed up to Captain Davern, sweating and panicking, and told him to turn off all the boat's lights and ignore all onshore calls that came into the boat. In the aftermath, Davern claimed that Wagner kept him confined to his quarters in order to prevent him from giving a statement to the police, then held an impromptu meeting in which he ordered Walken and Davern to keep quiet about the arguments and to essentially give false statements to the police. In light of such statements, police reopened the investigation into Natalie Wood's death in the year 2012. A re-examining of the information gleaned from her autopsy had one corner declaring that she had died as a result of drowning, but also from other undetermined factors. Then, in 2018, Wagner was officially named as a person of interest in Natalie Wood's death. Natalie's sister Alana came out and gave a media interview, stating that she believed Captain Davern's claims to be true, and had even confronted Wagner on the day of Natalie's funeral in an attempt to get him to reveal what had actually happened that night. This culminated an appearance on the popular TV show Dr. Fell, in which Lena and Davern publicly accused Wagner of being solely responsible for Natalie's death. However, Lana was keen to make it clear that she didn't believe it to be outright murder, and that she didn't believe Wagner ever really intended to kill his wife, but either because lost in his rage during a heat-in-the-moment decision, possibly denying Natalie help when she had fallen into the water while trying to leave the boat to go ashore, just as she had done just 2 nights previous. Despite the accusations from her sister, Natalie's 2 daughters, Natasha and Courtney, stand by their father's version of events, saying he had done all he could to preserve the mother's legacy. Courtney is not even Robert's biological daughter, but adores him so much that she has even taken on his surname, potentially is a sign of loyalty and respect. She personally believes and has publicly stated that Captain Davern is a fabricator, one who simply wishes to make a name for himself, exploiting her mother's death for monetary gain, and these claims do carry some weight to them. For example, Davern not only took 30 years to come forward with his accusations, but was also, by his own admission, extremely drunk on the night in question. His story is apparently changed multiple times throughout the years, leaking seedy gossip to tabloid journalists the entire time. He had also written a book about the events of the night in question, one which has been analyzed and debunked by numerous people who asserted that Davern's version of events are extremely spurious. When asked about Devon's claims, Robert's biological daughter, Natasha, was reportedly said he is somebody who I cannot even dignify with a response because he is so undignified. As for Christopher Walken, the only other person aboard the Splendor that evening, he hasn't spoken much at all about the incident, keeping suspiciously quiet over the years. When asked about how he felt regarding the reopening of the case, he reportedly said, "I don't know," having previously said that he firmly believed Natalie's death to be a tragic accident. In conclusion, it's not entirely out of the question that an extremely intoxicated Natalie might have tried to use the very same dinghy she had used a few nights previous, and doing so, she could have simply fallen into the water and drowned while the other people on board were either too drunk to respond to her cries or simply below deck and unable to hear her entirely. Yet, it's also scarcely feasible that a jealous husband had discovered her infidelities, either perceived or real, thrown her into the sea in a rage, and simply used his influence or outright threats to cover up the murder. It has been 39 years since Natalie's tragic death, and we are still no closer to knowing the entire truth as to what happened to her that night. And it's not only her family and friends that deserve concrete answers, but society as a whole. Have we had a murderer walking among the Hollywood elite for the past 40 years or so? Or has an innocent man been subjected to a campaign of slander when he should have been given room to heal? Whatever happened that Thanksgiving weekend, one thing is painfully clear, that the dark prophecy told to Maria Zakharhenko by the Chinese fortune teller in the early 20th century did actually come true. And it was indeed dark waters that became the undoing of the young woman who came to be known to the world as Natalie Wood.
"10 years ago, I was in the Army, stationed at Fort Benning in Georgia. In Georgia, there can be a load of completely random thunderstorms in the summer. They really do just come out of nowhere. The sky can be blue and sunny with barely a single cloud in the sky, and then 20 minutes later, you would think you're in the worst storm of your life. When these storms approach, the base would issue lightning warnings. They would blow their air sirens, and all personnel on the base were supposed to get inside for safety. We were out in the field doing some pre-deployment tasks, and we're heading in to get cover. As we were in the middle of doing that, a soldier about 50 meters away all of a sudden got struck by lightning. It was hands down one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen. To watch a man, a human being, just get slaughtered by something no one had control over within milliseconds. He had a family too, and he was a good dad and husband, which just made it even worse. After the fact, I wasn't aware the effects of getting struck by lightning could vary. Many people actually survive with some degrees of burns and scars. Not him. He was completely turned inside out and unrecognizable. Even though we knew who he was, obviously they still had to identify the body via dental records. That's just how torn apart he was. Speaking of spontaneity, people also need to be more concerned with lake trips and vacations. It's not as wonderful as commercials and advertisements make them out to be. People need to remember that anything can happen at any time, on any day, and sometimes for seemingly no reason at all. It's just fate, I guess. For example, I used to work at this park with a lake as a main attraction. One day it was really peaceful out in the lake. The park wasn't packed, which was surprising. And then boom, all of a sudden, a dude drowned after falling out of his paddle boat. The death itself was already horrible, but what made it even more morbid was that he was there with a school group for their last summer vacation, along with his family too. So I experienced not only a dead body, but also ended up seeing young children coming to grips with human death for the first time. One of the friends of the deceased tried to fight with the park rangers because he thought they didn't try hard enough. To be fair, they tried the best they could, and the friend had to be dragged away by police. Another girl had told the deceased to wear a life jacket, which he didn't, and ended up blaming herself for not pressing the issue hard enough. One of the guys who ran the boat's rental heroically dove into the lake to pull up a girl who was also without a life jacket that was in the boat with the deceased when they fell, and he no doubt saved her life. When the family of the deceased finally saw the confirmation of the body, they almost immediately began wailing and howling in remorse, forming a tight circle to provide some measure of support. A crowd had gathered to watch the police fish the poor guy out of the lake, then a fight broke out because someone was smoking and another took offense. There really isn't an end to the story. They took his body out of the lake and then everyone reacted in whatever ways their brain enforced. Anger, dread, and grief, when it was supposed to be simply some kid's classroom's last day of school before their big summer break.